know that we both would have preferred to be with you in person, but this is a great alternative. And just real quickly before we get started, can you remind me what norms are at your seminar series? I would prefer if people jump in with questions if anything is unclear, or substantive questions when they have them. Is that
I
okay
think
with you? Or
yeah, that's pretty fine.
okay, great.
Yeah.
So wonderful to be here today. My name is Carpenter, as was said, and I am at Vanderbilt. This is a paper that's not about LGBTQ folks specifically, but rather about another research passion area of mine, which is kind of youth, young adults, adolescents, and risky behaviors, and kind of the determinants and the formation of those risky behaviors. I've looked a lot at public policies and the determination of those behaviors. And here we're looking at kind of the role, what we want to argue is that we're looking at the role of negative social comparisons in affecting health behaviors. So the motivating overarching question of the whole set of research things that we're thinking about is whether negative social comparisons have causal effects on health. And
that's sexy. I probably have to go to this meeting.
Oh, sorry. There you go.
Sorry about that.
You're good. Yep. Whether negative social comparisons have causal effects on health, and causal will be a key part of what we hope we're trying to do and uncover in this paper. And by way of motivation, in the United States recently, our Surgeon General, which is the top doctor in charge of public health in the United States, recently warned of a looming youth mental health crisis that may have been exacerbated or ignited during the pandemic. And that article in the New York Times referenced that in the United States, emergency room visits for suicide attempts rose 51% for adolescent girls in early 2021 as compared to the same period in 2019. And in the State of the Union address, President of the United States, Joe Biden, in 2023 said, let's do more on mental health, especially for our children. We must finally hold social media companies accountable for the experiment they are running on our children for profit. So certainly there is the belief in major policy circles that social media has an outsized negative influence on youths and adolescents in particular as to a variety of ways that they see themselves. And that might be particularly true for certain demographics of young people, including, for example, young girls. So I just want to show you some time trends in outcomes that kind of will help lay the foundation for the case that we will want to make about what's going on and why we think this is an interesting and important thing to study. So what you're looking at here are two series from data that we will use in the paper. We'll use lots of different types of data in the paper, but one of them will be this large public health survey of high school kids in the United States. So these are grade 9 to grade 12 kids, 13 to 18-year-olds. And this is the share of teen girls in a nationally representative high school survey who in the triangles spent too much time online, and in the circles say that they felt sad or hopeless for 2+ weeks in a row. And what you'll see here is that there has after kind of a series of not much happening, there was kind of a noticeable uptick in the probability of spending too much time online, and a reversal of trend in some sense in the likelihood that the youths felt sad or hopeless for 2+ weeks straight. Obviously, this is not a causal relationship, but it certainly kind of is consistent with and forms some data motivation for the nature of the relationships that we're going to try to address in this paper. Social media is, so just to be clear, the empirical work we're going to show you is not about Facebook, is not about the current contemporary time. We're going to exploit variation induced in an earlier time period that we think might tell us something interesting about the debate that's going on now. But the nature of that debate, you may remember from not too long ago, is the picture of the person you're looking at there is Frances Haugen. And she was the quote unquote Facebook whistleblower, an internal employee at Facebook who revealed in congressional testimony that in fact, Facebook knew that Instagram is toxic for teen girls. Their internal own company documents reveal that they were aware of this adverse relationship for young people, especially young girls. That actual relationship is very, very thorny to disentangle for all manner of standard reasons about, people choose their media, people choose what images that they are exposed to, at least to some extent. And so disentangling whether that exposure to kind of these certain types of images, and in particular, the images we'll be talking about today are kind of this like unattainable physical ideal. Whether those things are causally related to people's, and in particular teen girls' outcomes, is a real trick and a real challenge. And that's why we're going to do this in this paper. We're going to look at one interesting institutional case study that we think will tell us potentially something interesting, although we'd love to hear your views on the degree to which you're along with that on that ride with us. And that interesting setting is beauty pageants in the United States. So in particular, there are two very big beauty pageants in the United States for adult women, Miss America and Miss USA. And we're going to study these pageants between for a 2-decade period between 1990 and 2010. We'll talk about why we're doing that, but primarily this is the period. So pageants in the United States have fallen out of favor and their popularity has declined. We're going to look at a period when they were very, very popular, so popular that they were on primetime television networks on a Friday night or a Saturday night, like millions of viewers, like people knew what was going on and they were watching these things. And in particular, the whole title of our paper alludes to the song that is sung in one of the pageants. So as the winner of Miss America is crowned, a song is sung and a crown is put on her head. And the song lyrics say, "There she is, Miss America. There she is, your ideal. With so many beauties, she took the town by storm with her all-American face and form," right? So literally the winner of the pageant is saying, like, this is your ideal. This is kind of how you are supposed to be if you want to be this all-American woman and girl. And so if you are not familiar with pageants in the United States, they are literally events where thinness is on display. So people put on bikinis and walk down a runway in the bikini with a sash across their chest that says the state that they are representing. This has fallen out of favor and kind of no longer, it was, replaced with a variety of other competitions, but actually, I'll show you in a minute, maybe coming back in certain contexts. The empirical thing that studying beauty pageants gets us is that it has a different state winner every year. Now, a small number of states do win multiple times, but broadly, the winner of the pageant kind of moves around the United States. And the trick for us will be that, like, the winning state is plausibly unrelated to the unobserved determinants of the outcomes we're going to look at. So we're going to look at things like teen girls' weight, their weight intentions, their exercise behaviors, young adult women's weight, etc., and a variety of other kind of risky behaviors for these young people. And so this is just, maps of the states that were represented as winners in Miss America on the left and Miss USA on the right. And, I think we want to say, we're not saying that this is a random set of states, but it is, there are lots of states represented in all regions of the country. There are kind of lines or pockets of states that are winning, but like the argument for us is going to be like the timing of when a state wins one of these pageants is plausibly unrelated to the unobserved determinants of outcomes. This is pageants are not just relevant in the United States. They are also relevant elsewhere, including where you are sitting right now. And there is discussion in other settings of bringing back the swimsuit competition that was actually sent away as it was in the United States. And the whole idea behind the paper, so again, our context is going to be the United States. And the whole idea of the paper is that when the young woman from your state is named the winner, what that does is it, especially in the period we're looking at, is it shocks the salience of local norms about what is pretty, what is beautiful, what is ideal. And to make this concrete, the way that we think this happens is through mechanisms such as the one I'm going to show you now. So here is 1996 on a Friday or a Saturday night. Millions of people watched Chantel Smith, Miss Oklahoma, win the Miss America competition. That very next morning in Chantel Smith's home state, on the largest newspaper in her state, the Daily Oklahoman, front page above the fold, there she is. And the title here is, crowned iced Miss America's birthday cake, because I think she won on or around her birthday. So the point here is, right, if you woke up, even if you didn't see the pageant, if you woke up the next day, your parents, for example, as they were flipping through the paper, saw front and center that Chantel Chantel Smith, this hometown girl, was named is Miss America, is what everyone thinks is beauty and idyllic, and maybe people talked about it that at the dinner table. Any number of things could have happened, but that only happened in Oklahoma, or it uniquely happened in Oklahoma. I'm going to show you the front page news on that exact same day in 2 other states, right? So, and this is generalizes to other states as well, but here is the front page news of the Tennessee's largest newspaper on that same date, the morning after Chantel Smith won, the Tennessean, and the largest newspaper in Pennsylvania, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And you see there is like nothing, there's no similar news coverage of Chantel Smith's win, right? So this is the idea behind the mechanism behind what we think is going to be going on for kind of delivering these shocks or messages about the salience of local norms. And we're going to use data later in the paper. Brandon's going to describe this about kind of how newspaper coverage for Miss America, which actually had much more newspaper coverage than Miss USA, which is this lower series here, how that was related to how home state wins increase the likelihood of home state news coverage. And so we're going to show you a collage of evidence. This is one of these papers where there's like no single smoking gun, I think, but like there's a collage of results that we think all point to a story that we want to tell about these negative social comparisons affecting teen and adolescent girls and young women in particular. So what we're going to show you is a series of results, and then I'll pause and see if there's any questions. What we're going to show you is that, again, leveraging the timing of that map, the timing of when the identity of an individual state wins, i.e. the year in which North Carolina wins being different than a year in which Texas wins, being different than a year in which Oregon wins. What we're going to show you is in that year when there's a home state win, new pageant-related newspaper coverage, like Chantel Smith that I just showed you, increases significantly, and Google searches, so we're going to use Google Trends data for searches for the pageants. Google search intensity, i.e. interest in the pageant, increases uniquely and significantly within the home state. Okay, so there's something about a shock to the information environment where people are aware, they're learning, they're demanding information about what's going on after a home state win in one of these pageants. Importantly, and this is, I think, the key result of the paper, what we're going to show you is that surveys of high school girls and surveys of adults, including where we're going to focus on young adult women, both of these surveys show that adolescent girls and young adult women, coincident with a home state win, i.e. for women and young girls in that state, coincident with that win, they were significantly more likely to report that they were trying to lose weight. Okay. We're going to show you a variety of other interesting twists on that result as well. We're going to show you, where in the weight distribution this happens. We're going to show you things about perceptions of people's weight and misperceptions of their weight. But the core result here is coincident with a home state win or right after a home state win, girls and young women in that state basically think of themselves as too heavy and say that they are trying to lose weight. We're also going to show you that pregnant women, so we're going to use the universe of births in the United States. So think of birth certificates where we observe kind of amount gained during pregnancy. What we're going to show you is that pregnant women, even pregnant women, not just like the representative teenage girl or the representative young adult woman, even pregnant women were subject to this phenomenon. What we find is that if you were pregnant during the timing of a home state pageant win, you actually gained less weight during that pregnancy. So we think of this result as important because, so there's just as a preview, there's going to be no effect on the kid, no effect on kid weight, on the infant, right? There's going to be no other kind of meaningful clinical effects, but that the pregnant woman herself gained less weight. So we think that that's an important result because it's not, it's a clinically relevant measure of and an objective measure of weight as reported on the birth certificate is associated with these kind of shocks to the salience of local norms. And an important part of our argumentation is going to be there's nothing going on for boys. There's nothing going on for same age young men. And there's nothing going on for older women. And we think older women are probably less likely to be subject to these same kind of, at least to the same extent of the salience of these norms as the young adult women and the teenage girls who are kind of more the focus or more proximal in age to the pageant winner. Okay, so we're going to show you a bunch of twists on those results, and we're going to try to convince you that those results are consistent with our story, but that's the paper in a slide. So let me pause here for a moment and see if there are any clarifying or substantive questions before I move on. Yes.
Did you check also the newspapers for the states which are immediately next to the winning state?
We did. So we're the universe for the newspaper analysis is the largest circulating newspaper in each state. And so the control group is any non-winning state. And so effectively they are in the control group. What you're asking, I'm sure, is like, is there a nearby spillover to the news coverage in the adjacent states? I'm looking at Brandyn on Zoom to remember. So I don't think we ran that specification specifically as to whether that thing percolated across state lines, but certainly we could. A challenge we could and can and should. A challenge with that is that it is not always the case that where she is from is close to like where the home state, the largest newspaper is in the state, but that's not a reason that I agree that would be an interesting thing to do. We haven't done that yet. Yes. I see a hand in the back, I think.
Go ahead. I'm just wondering about that measure about adolescent girls reporting trying to lose weight. Just wondering if that is data where that data came from. Is that, because it feels like a measure that we don't get asked particularly often unless in very particular situations. So yeah, just wondering a bit more about that measure.
Yeah, great question. Brandyn will talk about this in detail, but in we get at it in two different ways, and they're asked slightly different across the different surveys. So in the United States, we have this very large survey called the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System. It is it's the large, like 400,000 people are called every year. It is a state representative survey put out by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and people are asked both about their height and their weight, for which we get a self-reported objective weight or body mass index, but they're also asked like what they're trying to do about their weight. Are they trying to lose weight? Are they dieting? Are they exercising, etc.? And another way that we kind of get at weight perceptions is in the young adult version of that same survey. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention also does a survey called the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. That's actually the survey underlying the trends that I showed you a couple of slides ago. There, the high school students are also asked to self-report their height and their weight. So we get their implied body mass index, but they're also asked about whether they view themselves as too heavy. They're asked about their perception of their own weight, whether they are overweight, whether they are normal weight, whether they are underweight, etc. And so we'll show you some interesting results on kind of missed perceptions, how home state pageant winning is associated with misperceptions of a young girl's own weight.
There was another.
Was there another question?
Yeah.
The contestants in the pageants, do they have to come from one state and have grown up there their whole lives, or like are they moving around? Is this kind of interaction? Yeah.
That's a great question. There's no requirement that they spent their whole life there or that they were born there. So I think it's not uncommon, for example, for somebody to go away to college and represent the state where they went away to college from. Sometimes I'm guessing that people make strategic decisions about how tough the competition will be in West Virginia than, say, California, where there's a much larger denominator of larger denominator of competition. So I don't know, there's not that requirement. Did you have another question behind that question?
I guess if that affects the coverage, if they're maybe not native to the state, or if they've like the Californian blood or whatever, but then moved to a different state, if there's some sort of like interaction with like between maybe the home state will also like where they're actually from, like.
Yeah. This is a really interesting question. We haven't explored that, but you could certainly imagine like a hometown girl makes good kind of story where like the home state newspaper is also covering as well as the current state of residence. And so we haven't done that, in part because it's a little bit challenging to track down all of the life histories of all of the winners. But one could, in theory, do that. And I agree that that would be an interesting analysis to do.
We have a question in the chat about the heterogeneity analysis. Can you look at whether the result is stronger for those girls and young women with the shared characteristics with the winner?
That is that is a fantastic question. And I think, went in thinking that that is exactly what you would observe, and that would be gangbusters. And we certainly did look at that. And I think we will show you that evidence, but it's not as strong as you might think. So it's really the home state evidence that is the primary thing. We do see, I think, and Brandon will have to jump in here and correct me. I think we do see for Black winners and Black women and girls respond more to Black winners. Brandon, correct me.
Yeah, that is correct. So we did look at that. The one limitation is there are not a lot of non-white pageant winners. Which sort of leaves us a little underpowered. But we find suggestive evidence that the home state relationship is more pronounced for individuals who share the same race and ethnicity. So exactly, if it is a home state winner who is Black girls respond. And actually in that specification, we didn't find any response among white girls. And if it is a home state pageant winner who is white, we find that white girls respond, and Black girls do respond, but it is not as strong of a response.
Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah.
I want to ask, how
Could you both speak up because the mic is here? So
how often do these pageants take place? Is it every year or every few years?
Every year.
Every year, and then how the gestational weight was measured? Was it because only 3 months there are in a year when a woman is not pregnant? So if it happens every year, it's kind of hard to measure the gestational weight of women who are not pregnant.
Yes, great question. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you different we can control for whether the home state pageant win happened in first trimester, second trimester, or third trimester, to try to disentangle whether it is plausible that the timing of the win coincided with the timing when the gestational weight gain would have been plausible. And we'll show you those results. I think that's what you're asking. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And great question. And we'll show you those results.
So it's not no other burning questions. So
okay, great.
Move on.
Great, thanks. So let me see here. So let me just be clear that the idea, we are certainly not the first people to identify this idea. This is a well identified idea. I think we are the first people, I would say, that we're trying to get at this using arguably causal methods. Just on its face, what's happening, what you're showing here is the average body mass index of the adult women in the United States in blue, and the average body mass index of Miss America pageant winners in yellow. And what you see here is that over time, right, the average woman is getting heavier. This is well documented. And the average, but what is maybe less well known, is that the average Miss America pageant winner is getting less and less, lighter and lighter. And, this is what the federal guidelines say in green is the normal weight. And so what you'll see here is that, and this is a little bit out of date. What you'll see here is that since 2000, this is well documented, excuse me, in the United States, obesity and overweight have increased significantly. But, this may not surprise you from the pictures in that salacious picture that I used as motivation, not salacious, sorry, that picture of all those women in bikinis that I showed you at the beginning. But the typical in recent years Miss America winner and Miss USA is clinically underweight, right? They are not a healthy weight according to federal guidelines in the United States. Okay, so what pageants are we talking about? So great question that was asked earlier. Are they annual? Yes, they're annual. They happen at these times of year. These age eligible people, young adult women are eligible. There are some slight differences in the pageants, but broadly they are similar in that over the years that we are studying, they were on major network television, and they included a variety of categories that broadly looked the same. Swimsuit, which one pageant changed to call fitness for political correctness reasons, evening gown, interview, and then one of the pageants had a talent portion. This is an economics paper, and I do think that it is speaking to a variety of literatures in health economics and a variety of other subfields. And here is the literatures we think it speaks to. One is this literature on relative deprivation. A bunch of papers show that like having less of something than your peers is linked to bad stuff. So there's this paper in Journal of Human Resources that shows that if you have less money than your peers or you're lower income than your close peers, then you have worse health, higher body weight, and higher risk of death. Similar findings have been found for alcohol and tobacco consumption. There is a related literature on women and girls who have thinner peers using a variety of different identification strategy to generate plausibly exogenous variation in how heavy your peer group is, depending on, some using just like naturally occurring random variation across high school classes, cohorts, for example. And these results show that if you have thinner peers, then you're more likely to view yourself as heavy and to purge, have purging behaviors, which are unhealthy. You're also more likely to be anorexic. A similar flavor of a result is in this paper that shows that, you look at kids who move across metropolitan statistical areas because, say, their parent got a different job, so they're moving through no choice of their own. And what you see here is that, if you move and nothing happened to your own weight, but because your comparison group weight is different, you're either heavier or lighter in the relative comparison group. Children who move to a thinner MSA actually have higher behavioral problems, which may be a social comparison kind of thing. And then finally, our paper, again, we're not in a time period where we're really we're not really in the Facebook or the Instagram time period. We're kind of purposefully going in an earlier time period. But there are these very recent papers that have used experimental manipulations of how much time people spend online. So for example, using Facebook to show that Facebook is bad for you. Facebook lowers self-reported happiness for, and one of these channels is certainly negative social comparisons. There's a big literature on television. A key mechanism we're going to lean on is that things happen. These pageants were on TV, and then people watched them and then read about them in the newspaper. There's all manner of papers that I'm not going to detail about how TV, like television media content, using plausibly very exogenous variation in the time slots of shows or things like that, exposure to violent media. Or exposure to, a lot of papers showing that exposure to TV and movies in plausibly exogenous ways actually has real effects on economically meaningful and or clinical outcomes, including weight-related behaviors. So at this point, I'm going to pause and let Brandyn talk about data, methods, and results.
And Kit, you're going to have to stop sharing your screen so I can share mine, if that's okay. Fantastic. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. And let me make sure that you see the right screen. Good. So as Kit said, we're going to be looking at a couple different measures of pageant exposure, one of which is going to be newspapers data. So this is going to be from newspapers.com, which is an affiliate of ancestry.com, if you're familiar with them. And what we are going to look at, is front page newspaper coverage. So similar to that Chantel Smith photo that Kit put up earlier, after a pageant, we're going to measure, was there any mention? And then in some robustness, we'll say, was there a mention that included a photo? We're going to use the largest state-specific paper, so you shouldn't be thinking about like New York Times or Wall Street Journal. These are things that are spread throughout the United States. We're going to be thinking about papers that are sort of specific or local to that state where that winter occurred. So for example, I'm in Massachusetts right now. It would be the Boston Globe would be our relevant paper. We're also going to use Google Trends data as a measure of sort of how salient was this exposure. Maybe you see it in the media, but does this induce you to really think about it or dwell on it or seek out information related to it? So if you don't know, Google Trends takes this random sample of all searches in a year. They're going to index the month, year in which this is maximized to 100. So 100 is going to be bigger, 0 is going to be smaller, to measure this relative search intensity. And we're going to do this in ordinary least squares regressions. where the dependent variable will be, was there a front page newspaper coverage? Was there front page newspaper coverage? Or that Google Trends index. Will control for a bunch of state level time varying demographic characteristics, the share of non-white women, unemployment rate, other weight related policies or policies that have been shown to influence weight related outcomes. It will include some state fixed effects, time fixed effects, and then some state specific linear trends, though I will show you results with those trends and without those trends. And they don't seem to matter too much, though sometimes they help with our precision. For the weight-related health behaviors, so this was the question about where are we getting this measure of are you trying to lose weight? As Kit alluded to, we're going to use the behavioral risk factor surveillance system. This is going to be for adults, so our primary age group of interest will be these pageant-aged women, 18 to 28. And we're going to look at things like, are you trying to lose weight? We'll look at some physical activity measures. Are you dieting? And then we'll look at measures of BMI. The adolescent analog is the youth risk behavior surveys. These are surveys of high school age youth, where we'll look at weight loss strategies. Are you exercising, dieting, using diet pills, as well as measures of self-perception. So not only will we know what they say their, sort of the weight and height is, so we can calculate their BMI, we will know something about how they view their bodies. So we can say, is it the case that non-overweight girls view themselves as overweight, or maybe view themselves as underweight? So we'll have this measure of perception. And then for the birth certificate data, as was stated, this is the universe of births in the United States. Birth certificate data where we'll have knowledge of your gestational weight gain, and we'll be able to say, because so the pageants moved around October, November, December. For Miss USA, it was in January through April, and we'll be able to leverage that and then sort of leverage the variation induced by when someone conceived to try and get at when in the gestational process does this seem to be salient. Again, ordinary least squares regression, outcomes of interest. Are you trying to lose weight? We'll do those same right-hand side state level time varying covariates. But we'll also control for some demographic characteristics, your age, race, ethnicity, marital status, education. And as was alluded to in the question, we'll also control for, was the individual the same race or ethnicity as the contestant? And in some robustness and heterogeneity, we look at how the results vary by that. Include some state and time fixed effects and those state-specific linear trends. Okay, so the first question is, to what degree did this actually induce any change in media coverage? So what we find is, after a home state pageant win, states were statistically, sort of a statistically significant increase in front page newspaper coverage. And these are quite large in magnitude, especially relative to the pre-period mean. So we take this as evidence that, yes, following that home state pageant win, those winning states were more likely to have newspaper coverage of the pageant relative to the non-winning state. And we can put this into an event study specification to measure what was happening relative to the pageant air date. And what we see is no evidence sort of a differential pre-trend. It isn't that states which did win were sort of able to anticipate it a year in advance. Instead, we find that it was once the state won the competition that they were more likely to actually cover the competition. Similarly, when we look at the Google Trends data, we find that following a home state pageant win, individuals within the state were sort of more intensely seeking out information related to the pageant. They were more likely to be Googling for Miss America. They are more likely to be, going into Google and typing in something related to Miss USA. And similar to those that newspaper figure, when we put this into an event study specification, right, we see no evidence that individuals, and this is sort of the month relative to the air date. So it doesn't seem that they were, anticipating that they were going to win. I think to sort of the casual viewer, you would have a hard time disentangling at the start sort of the differences among the contestants in some regards. So it wasn't like, okay, I know that Miss California is going to win this year, so I'm going to tune in. This increased interest in the pageant was limited to that post-pageant period. And I will note, sort of seemed to fade out relatively quickly, right? So this is a transient shock. Sort of it increases the salience apparently, though it does fade out over time, which does stand in contrast to, say, Instagram, TikTok, other forms of social media where you get that repeated exposure. So we sort of take this table as sort of first stage proof of concept type evidence that yes, home state pageant wins were associated with increased coverage and increased salience of the pageant. We do a lot of robustness checks here. So we look, and what we find is this is unique to winners. So we can look at second place finishers, third place finishers, and there's no relationship for those individuals. It has to be a pageant win. We can look at sort of the specific pageant. So it's the case that Miss America win induces more Miss America coverage, induces more Miss America search intensity. We don't see any cross pageant spillovers. So people were, the day and the month afterwards, they were more likely to be looking up the pageant that they had just won, not a pageant that had occurred 6-7 months prior. Sort of hands above the table, what we thought, well, maybe it's possible that individuals were also subsequently more likely to look up, how do I lose weight, diet strategies, those types of things. We don't find any evidence of that. I would say that, these are things that are much more intensely searched throughout the year relative to the pageants. So the margin of adjustment there might be less than for the pageant, but we don't see anything if there is an effect there. Okay, now turning to the actual weight-related health behaviors, I'm going to start with those adult outcomes. So mainly going to be focused on pageant-aged women, those 18 to 28-year-old. And then as falsifications, we'll look at those pageant-aged men, similarly aged men, and older women. And we're going to, the first sort of result is, are you trying to lose weight? And what we find is following a home state pageant win, 18 to 28-year-old women, so those pageant-aged women, were 2.2 percentage points more likely to report that they were trying to lose weight. This is about a 5% increase relative to their sample mean. And we don't detect any statistically significant relationship for men, similarly aged men, in fact, sort of it's opposite signed, or older women, where it's much smaller in magnitude and opposite signed. Groups for whom we think that this comparison is plausibly less salient. When we put it also into that event study specification, what we find here is that this increase appears to be limited to or sort of most dramatic in the month of the pageant air date. So, if I answered, if I was a pageant-aged woman, I answered the Burfus survey, my state had just won Miss America, I was more likely to say that I was trying to lose weight. This is also the period in which we found this increased coverage, this increased search intensity. Come 4 months out during that same time in which coverage and search intensity had sort of settled and diminished, we don't see that relationship as pronounced anymore. And now, basically, for every data set, I will show you a slide that sort of follows this same pattern where I'll say, this was unique to home state winners. We did not find any relationship for second place finishers or third place finishers. We did find increases from both pageants. The Miss America pageant was larger in magnitude. It is also the sort of more watched and more covered of these two pageants. If you think back to that trend that Kit had put up sort of right at the beginning of the front page newspaper coverage. It's robust to a variety of sample restrictions. So we can say, let's only look at states whichever won during our sample period. Maybe winning states are just different in some ways. If we restrict attention to those states, we still find a relationship. We can drop those state level time varying controls. We can iteratively drop each winning state. So this is not just sort of a California story or a New York story. We can drop those winning states and we still find this relationship. Sort of one of the ways that we get at recent conversations regarding the difference in differences literature is we drop each state the year after it was treated, so that the treatment will only occur in 1 year and then they fall out of the sample if you're worried about sort of heterogeneous treatment effects over time. We still find the same relationship there. This also gets at the fact that we do have a couple of states which were repeat winners, though it is a very small number. And then maybe what I find to be one of the more convincing robustness checks is we do some randomization inference where we randomly assign pageant winners every year, rerun our specification, save the beta coefficient is on the left-hand side, the t-stat is on the right-hand side, depending on your preferred method of randomization inference. And sort of regardless of what we do here, we do that process 5,000 times. We find that the relationship we're identifying is sort of well outside of what we would likely see from chance. Now, as Kit said, this is, we can look across the weight distribution. In fact, this is driven by overweight and obese women, women with a BMI over 25. And this is the group for whom, the difference between what they see in the mirror and what they see in the coverage is the most dramatic. We don't detect any change in BMI, and we find some evidence of an increase in the number of self-reported poor mental health days. In the month after the pageant, women with home state pageant winners were more likely to report that they had sort of a deterioration of their mental health. It fades out over time, and it isn't detected for those other falsification groups. Now, turning to those adolescent girls, one of the outcomes I'm going to be showing you here is the self-description of the girl relative to her BMI. So does she accurately describe her body, or does she have sort of too harsh of a view? So if an overweight teen describes herself as overweight, we're going to consider that an accurate assessment. But if a teen in the recommended region describes herself as overweight, we're going to say that she has too harsh of a view of her body. And we're drawing on this from the public health and medical literatures. This is a measure that has been used previously. And we're also going to look at what are they doing for their weight. Are they exercising to lose weight? Are they dieting to lose weight? And so on. And what we find here is some suggestive evidence that following a home state pageant win, girls held less accurate views of their body. So girls in the winning state held less accurate views of their body, and they held too harsh a view of their body. So they were describing themselves as heavier than they were. This is unique to teen girls. If you're interested, I can show you the table. We find no relationship for teen boys. Now, to sort of try and pin down, so who was it here who was changing, whose perception was changed? What we do in this table is in panel A, the sample is non-overweight or non-obese girls, right? So these are girls whose BMI puts them less than overweight. And what we find is the columns there are the outcomes of interest, the dependent variable. They were 4.7 percentage points less likely to describe themselves as normal weight. And these non-overweight girls were 4.2 percentage points more likely to describe themselves as overweight. So we think this is evidence of sort of a distortion in body image or a distortion in self-perception. Down in panel B, we're going to look at overweight girls. And we actually see sort of no clear pattern, nothing statistically significant, and sort of no pattern, so to speak of. So we think this is evidence that at least for adolescent girls, this seems to be driving a distortion among those non-overweight girls, which I should note, when we presented this before, we get to talk to people who watch these pageants. And sometimes I wonder if, I don't think that result will come to a surprise, as a lot of people who might have watched these pageants growing up, someone who is, currently a teen girl or was formerly an adolescent girl. Then when we look at what are they trying to do about their body weight, we find that following a home state pageant win, teen girls were 3.4 percentage points more likely to report exercising to lose weight. We don't find any change in sort of these what are broadly classified as risky weight loss strategies. I should note that the American Medical Association and Academy of Pediatrics says that even dieting for adolescents is considered a risky health behavior because it is associated with disordered eating behaviors later on. However, so the sample means here are relatively small. About 6% of girls report purging at some point, which is unfortunate, but still relatively small. If we limit ourselves to just any calorie limiting behavior in this column 6 here, we find a 3.6 percentage point increase in the likelihood that teen girls with a home state pageant winner engaged in some type of a calorie limiting behavior. Not going to sort of pick out which one it is, but it's some type. So we find evidence of an increase in exercising to lose weight and some evidence that they also limited their calories. When we look at teen boys, adolescent boys, sort of across the table, we don't detect any statistically significant relationship. So again, this is something that was driven or was unique to teen girls in the home state pageant winning states. The results are unique to home state winners. No result from second place finishers or third place finishers. They are unique to that pageant year. So when we do sort of leads and lag specification for a bunch of institutional reasons, it's hard to do event studies with the YRBS, state cycle in and out. It's asked every other year. But what we find is that this increase is limited to the pageant year. 2, 3, 4 years out, we don't detect any relationship. And in the years prior, we don't detect any relationship. We can engage in a sort of a variety of your traditional battery of robustness tests, exclude the state-specific linear time trends, instead include census region by year fixed effects, census division by year fixed effects, and across these alternative controls for spatial heterogeneity, we continue to find increases in the likelihood that these adolescent girls with home state pageant winners reported trying to lose weight. And when we adopt randomization inference as well, we find that our estimates are outside of what you would have expected to see from chance. So the empirical p-value for coefficients is 0.13. For t-stats, it's 0.04, suggesting that this is not sort of a spurious relationship that we are just picking up randomly. Okay, because I know there were some questions on measuring the natality data and how do we measure gestational weight gain and when do we measure the weight gain. So our variables of interest are going to be during this time period. This has been revised in recent years, but at least during the sample period we are considering, a woman was considered to have gained inadequate weight during the course of her pregnancy if it was less than 25 pounds. So that's sort of our measure is of inadequate weight gain. Did she gain less than 25 pounds? And we're also going to look at some birth outcomes as well. So we're going to look at low birth weight. We do birth weight in grams and other gestational or other infant health outcomes. So what we find when we look at the sample, and sort of not sample, sorry, this is the universe of births occurring during this period, which sort of gives us a very large, many observations relative to some of our survey data, is we find an increase in the likelihood that women gained or women had inadequate weight gain during pregnancy. Right. So, I mean, it's a sort of precisely estimated increase in the likelihood of inadequate weight gain. Put another way, a reduction in that weight. It is relatively small relative to the sample mean. And we don't detect any sort of measures in low birth weight or birth weight in grams. But we think this is interesting that even these women for whom maybe you think that the salience would be less, because for Miss America and Miss USA, you cannot have ever been pregnant or have birthed or raised a child. That's one of the restrictions on the competition. We still find these measures or still find these relationships. And I see there's a question in the chat. Can you check if the pregnancy effect is concentrated in first-time mothers? Yes, I believe we looked at birth parity. And I believe it was more pronounced for first-time mothers. Yeah, I believe
Brandyn?
Yes.
I believe that there might be some more questions coming towards the end. If you could, I don't know how many slides you still have, but if you could sort of come to the end in the next 2 or 3 minutes, that would be great.
Great. Well, I can tell you that, as I said, we'll go through the same type of thing. This is unique to home state winners, nothing for second or third place finishers. It actually occurs early if the pageant win occurred earlier in the gestation period. We find this reduction. So if you experienced the win a week before you gave birth, your gestational weight gain was unaffected. Which we think sort of makes sense at that point. Sort of the opportunity for that adjustment is limited. And it's robust to a bunch of other measures of inadequate weight gain. So to conclude, we find that these home state pageant winners were associated with an increase in exposure to this thin imagery, that these adolescent girls and pageant age women were more likely to report trying to lose weight. No changes for these adolescent boys, young men or older women, which leads us to conclude that, yes, so the first question was, do social comparisons have a causal effect on health? Yes, they do matter for health. I mean, we think our policy implications are that this is some evidence on how media can shape tastes and preferences for health. When you think about what types of individuals are represented in the media, what types of body types, these types of things, there's ongoing conversations about retouching, regulation, social media. We think we have some evidence that, these types of conversations are important for these health effects. And I will conclude here. Thank you. And would you prefer I leave the slides up if people want to hop back to a result or exit out?
That would be great. Maybe first Richard and then Katja.
Could you go back to the effect on mental health, which in the context of well-being is the most important of your findings, I think.
Yes.
So sorry, could you take us through the magnitude of that effect?
Yes, so it is a 17% increase relative to the baseline mean. So this is how many poor mental health days did you have during the prior month? Where we're thinking about 4.5 as sort of being the typical response, and we find a 17% increase there.
So that the 0.17.
Yes, so these should be interpreted in percent relative to the baseline. So it's a 17% increase. We've already converted it for you.
I mean, that's a huge effect.
Yes, and we'll note that it does fade out over time and is limited to these pageant-aged women. It's limited to the month, sort of the month following the competition. And it is limited to home state winners, so nothing for second or third place finishers, which seems to suggest that in the month of the pageant, these pageants for those women in those winning states were particularly, as you said, it's a large effect, disastrous for mental health, or at least taxing on their mental health, I guess is what I should say.
And which age group is this?
18 to 28-year-old women.
Amazing.
Thank you very much. And I need to say I'm absolutely convinced by your results. And I just have a couple of questions of how do you think it works exactly? So do you have any change in the structure of these pageants during your time frame? So is it that any pageant bad for self-perception, which I'm honestly happy to believe, or are there any particular sort of events within that event that are more or less detrimental? And the second one is, do you think that when there is a home state win, there are the activities, like there is more, because you showed that the amount of exercises increase. Could it be that gyms start advertising more, and gyms advertisement can also be reasonably toxic, and that affects the perception? So this event generates other events. That's why the resulting effect magnifies.
So those are fantastic points. I should say that during our sample period, there is not meaningful change in the types of events that occur during the pageant. So more recently in 2018, I believe it was, the Miss America pageant did away with the fitness/swimsuit portion of the competition. That is, sort of after our sample period. We thought about trying to pin down, is this like the swimsuit portion of the competition? Is it the talent portion? And we couldn't, over our sample period, everyone is in a swimsuit at some point, and basically all the winners were singers as the talent portion of the competition. So there's not actually a lot of variation there that we could exploit. Now, to your point on advertising, and if companies sort of differentially respond following this pageant win, we did not look at that. We should look at that. That is an incredibly interesting point. And I have to think about how far back the ad spender or advertising data go. I think it would cover this period. No, that's very interesting. So we don't take a very strong stance in the paper about what is the precise mechanism. One interpretation is these teen girls and young women see they see the news coverage, they see the newspaper, it's probably on TV. Another is that their friends see it, and maybe it just increases weight-related talk among social groups. Another is that family members see it, and maybe it increases weight-related talk within the household. Those are all possible, and I don't think we're able to separately identify those. But the question on advertising, I think, is a really good one. Thank you.
So I had two quick questions. So one of them was, so I guess your identification assumption hinges on the idea that people do see things in the newspaper. I think your results are very convincing. I was wondering if you can kind of leverage that mechanism more by looking at the variation across states in newspaper circulation. I don't know if you have data on this, or if this would be like an interesting source of variation. But then you could maybe show that in states where more newspapers are being bought, the effects are bigger than in states where people don't look at newspapers. So that was one thing. And then the second thing, I was wondering if you have any data on whether your effects differ by socioeconomic status. I mean, are adolescent girls from deprived backgrounds more likely to be affected by this?
So as far as variation in circulation, that is knowable information. That's something we could definitely exploit. And we did not. We thought of the sort of the Google Trends data as sort of providing evidence. I mean, maybe they're viewing the news. For some reason, they are Googling it more. They are seeking out this information following it. Maybe they saw it on in the newspaper. Maybe their parents saw it. Maybe their friends saw it. As far as SES in the YRBS data for adolescents, a lot of ninth graders, I think sort of have a good knowledge of sort of what is their household income. I mean, they might know, sort of we're well off, we're not well off, but sort of we don't have like for adults, we know like 20 to 30,000, 30 to 40,000. We don't have it in the YRBS. I don't think we actually did look at that though for those pageant age women, the 18 to 28-year-olds, and it's something we could.
We certainly could, but can I follow up and ask, what is your hunch? Why do you think the low SES women and girls would be more affected?
Well, I was just wondering if girls who come from, let's say, a highly educated background might have different conversations with their parents in a way that maybe their parents will instill in them, they will be less likely to, you know, to feel threatened or to worry about losing weight, and especially losing weight in an unhealthy way. But I wouldn't know. It's just be interesting to know.
The closest thing that I think we do get to that for the adolescents is we look by region of the United States, and poverty and inequality are sort of concentrated within the U.S. South and the U.S. Midwest region. And that is where we find the most pronounced effects is for home state pageant winners from the U.S. South, followed by the Midwest, and less so for the West. You can think California, Oregon, Washington, and the Northeast. You can think sort of New England states.
Thanks.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, David.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. I'm quite interested to know more about the relative magnitude of some of your effects. For example, like what is the standard deviation across states and the proportion of young women reporting trying to lose weight? Because I think you said it was a 2 percentage point difference, and how much is that varying across state? Like, is this 2 percentage points very large or relatively smaller? The other very fast thing, and you talk about this a bit more in the paper, which I read over, was very good, is that adaptation to this exposure is very rapid. So I think your policy implications are more for permanent or repeated exposures. But I was wondering if you had any sense of if exposure is repeated or with duration, is there any kind of, do people become less sensitive? So is it there's a one-time shock, but maybe if it's repeated, do people kind of gradually, are they less sensitive? So those two points.
It's a great question. We haven't done anything sort of with sort of what is the standard deviation across states. That's something we can do and we can check. Now, as far as sort of the increase or reduction in sort of the sensitivity to this, we have very few states here that are repeatedly exposed. I think it's like 2, maybe 3 during our sample period, which I don't think our setting allows us to sort of make like.
Is there anything from outside that might hint at whether that's the case, or?
I'm not.
In other evidence.
Yeah, so I think that is important area for future work on social. I think social media is going to be sort of where people can study this question here. In the experimental papers, I don't think there wasn't like a second follow-up experiment later on. But if you know of any, please, I'd be interested to know if anyone does. Yeah.
I mean, I wonder if like one along the lines of that, which I agree is a great suggestion, if along the lines of that, like maybe you're asking, or maybe we could do, is there newspaper coverage on the second day after and the third day after and the fourth day after? Like, does it linger, like that amount of duration of exposure, which we haven't done, but we could do.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We need to close everything.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
We do have the tradition after the wedding seminar, we'll think about the talk. So we are for sure going. If anybody wants to come, it's really glad.
Remember there was one experiment where they kind of made people not use their phones.
Yes, that was the AR paper with not the page of the and that was with them, unsurprisingly.
It's very nice.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go, I think, because absentee is left to run. But are you going to get next Thursday?
Yes. And I thought because I thought that to work, they're like, oh, I'm gonna talk to them.
Then I need to go the way to Waterloo.
Of course. Next Thursday, it's on Saturday. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, next LSE is with that, so she's gonna.
Oh, yeah, I had it in my agenda, so I'll come for drinks for sure, and then hopefully we can catch up. I'll send him an email when I get back.
Oh, sorry, we blocked her. That I started the other side. Yeah.
Yeah. It's after 4 here this year anyways.
I. So that's.
Anyway.
Yeah, see, goes again.
No, about.
Genau that. So sometimes there's no seed available, especially at the beginning. And so like balance that in time. And Zoom.